The after-action review room was overflowing. SEALs in the front rows, Marines and soldiers packed shoulder to shoulder, officers along the walls. Boots tapped, low voices hummed, and the air carried that sharp, skeptical energy of men convinced they already knew the ending. At the podium, the colonel adjusted his notes. Today's debrief will be led by Specialist Nora Reyes. For half a second, silence. Then a ripple of laughter. "A clerk," someone muttered. "Maybe she stapled the battle report," another added, drawing smirks. A Marine captain leaned back, whispering, 361 nearly died, and they send an office girl to tell it?" Reyes stood quietly at the side, uniform pressed, folder in hand. No ranger tab, no chest full of ribbons. Just a name tape, REYES. She stepped forward, steady, unshaken, and tapped the slide remote. On the screen appeared a jagged valley, ridgelines like teeth. "This is the ground that tried to end you." Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Specialist Nora Reyes was 29. Small-framed, 5'3" on a good day, the kind of soldier people passed in the hallway without a second look. To most, she was the quiet clerk from S1, the shop that kept the machine of the Army running with signatures, leave forms, and awards routed to the right inbox. She was known for paper, not combat. When a battalion staff sergeant said, "We need Reyes," it usually meant a missing file, not a mission. The running jokes followed her everywhere. "She belongs in the office. Clerks don't fight wars. If the enemy comes, she'll beat them with staplers." Nora heard it all. She never answered back. What they didn't see was the way she studied while others slept. She had grown up in a border town where two languages braided together like wires. At home, Spanish. At school, English. In the streets, both at once. By the time she was 12, she was translating neighbors' bills, school memos, and even police questions. She learned early that words could save a person if delivered steady, clear, and calm. Panic had no place in translation. A wrong phrase could mean a lost job or a closed clinic door. Nora became a master of tone, of slowing her breathing so others slowed theirs. That gift came with her into the Army. On paper, she was assigned to administrative duties. In practice, her curiosity wandered where it wasn't required. The S1 shop sat next to the operations cage. Radios hummed on the other side of the wall. Every time the TOC Tactical Operations Center lit up, she heard the clipped exchanges. "Break send grid. Negative, danger close. Shift fire, 200 north." Most clerks tuned it out. She leaned closer. By her second year, she had memorized the frequency plan, every call sign, every alternate channel. She practiced radial brevity codes under her breath, whispering, "Roger, solid copy, break, standby." She drew maps in her notebook, marking ridgelines, valleys, and grids she overheard from reports. No one asked her to learn. She learned anyway. Sometimes, on late shifts, she would bring coffee to the comms NCOs. They laughed at first. The clerk wants to play operator, but they let her watch. She listened as they explained antenna angles, signal strength, how to cut through static. She practiced working a handset until the rhythm felt natural. She knew she would never wear the JTAC tab, never jump with Rangers, never clear a room with a rifle team. But she believed that knowing the net could one day mean saving a life. Still, to everyone else, she was invisible. Her reputation stayed small, the soldier who never lost a form, who showed up early, who stayed late. She was polite, efficient, and forgettable. She didn't drink at the barracks parties, didn't brag in the gym. To most, she was background noise. But to Nora, every hour in the TOC was rehearsal. She lauded the cadence of voices under stress. She timed how long it took for a call to be answered. She noticed which leaders went calm when things broke and which ones made it worse. She began to see battles in layers, ground, air, comms. If one layer collapsed, the others could be rebuilt. She didn't tell anyone what she was doing. She didn't need credit. She needed readiness. There were hints, small ones, that she carried more than paper. A sergeant once handed her a broken Singar's radio as a joke. "Here, clerk, fix this with a paperclip." 30 minutes later, she had traced the fault, reseated the fill, and passed it back working. He stared, shook his head, and muttered, "Huh. Lucky guess." Another time, during a training exercise, she corrected a lieutenant's grid call before it went out. She had memorized the map so well that she spotted the error instantly. The lieutenant bristled, embarrassed, and told her to stick to her lane. The unit never knew she had prevented a fire mission from landing on their own vehicles. These moments never made her legend. They faded like pencil marks. But she carried them as proof she could hold the line if no one else would. Nora Reyes had no medals to her name, no stories told in chow halls. She had something else. She had patience. She had memory. She had a mind that could build order out of static. The Army saw a clerk. What they didn't see was the person who would one day lift a radio, steady her breath, and keep 361 men alive when the valley turned black with fire. The day began like too many others in that valley, with the silence before violence. 361 Navy SEALs and attachments were moving through the corridor, a ribbon of dirt flanked by jagged ridges. Morning haze hung over the mountains, hiding the enemy until it was too late. The first shots cracked from the east slope, then the west, then both. Machine guns dug into rock lips opened up, hammering the column from above. Mortar rounds punched dirt, rattling helmets and scattering men into shallow cover. Within minutes, the valley became a cage. Inside the TOC, screens flickered with icons. Blue for friendly, red multiplying by the second. A staff captain whispered under his breath, "God help them!" The battalion operations major barked into the net, "Trident actual, status." The reply came back clipped, urgent, pinned on 3 sides, multiple wounded. "Ammo running low," an analyst muttered. "They walked right into a kill box." The air officer shook his head. "F-16s are 20 minutes out. Rules of engagement won't let them fire inside 100 meters. They're dead if we don't do something else." A silence spread, heavy and suffocating. Then came the hit that broke everything. The primary radial operator in the field, the comms lifeline for all 361, took a round through the chest. His last call was cut off mid-sentence. Static roared across the net. The SEAL platoons started shouting over each other. Calls overlapped. Coordinates jumbled. East Ridge taking fire need, drowned out by request fire mission, negative control, then someone else. We're blind here, blind. Chaos. No net discipline, no order, no central voice. In that moment, the battle wasn't just being lost on the ground. It was being lost in the airwaves. Nora Reyes sat at the edge of the TOC, a clerk's desk wedged against the wall. She had been there to log traffic, to keep timestamps on incoming reports. Pen in hand, not rifle. Clipboard, not comms. She froze only for a second as the static howled. Then her eyes flicked to the spare handset hanging idle on the rack. Her fingers twitched. She knew what to do. She always knew. But behind her, the officers snapped first. "Who's got the net? Get another operator up. We can't pass control to an admin clerk. She'll freeze." A sergeant laughed under his breath. "What's Reyes gonna do? File the enemy to death?" Another piled on. "She's just a paper pusher." "You want her handling fire missions?" Even the major spat it out. "Not her. Anyone but her." The insults layered like sandbags, each one trying to pin her down harder than the gunfire pinning the SEALs. Nora didn't argue. She didn't speak. She just reached forward, lifted the spare handset, and pressed the transmit key. Her voice cut through the static, steady and low. "Trident actual, this is TOC. Confirm you can read me." For half a second, only white noise. Then, "TOC, we copy." "Who's calling?" she answered simply. "Specialist Reyes." "I have the net." A ripple went through the room like someone had dropped glass on tile. Head snapped toward her. The sergeant who had mocked her hissed, "Are you insane? Put that down before you get someone killed." But then another voice came back across the air, ragged but alive. Copy, Reyes. We'll take anyone who can hear us right now. The Met had found a heartbeat again. The first real test came instantly. Enemy mortars, South Slope, Grid 229578. Need counter now. Maps scattered across the TOC table. Officers fumbled with digital overlays, trying to confirm the grid. Reyes didn't look down. She had memorized that valley weeks ago, sketching it in pencil when nobody was watching. She keyed the mic. Roger, South Slope, Grid 229578. Adjust fire mission, shift east by 50 meters. Danger close, authority confirmed. The fire support NCO stared. How the hell does she know that grid cold? Someone muttered. She guessed. Then the ground shook. A shell landed exactly where the mortars had been, silencing the tubes mid-burst. A SEAL voice came through, strained but clear. Solid copy. Enemy mortars neutralized. Good effect on target. The TOC went quiet. But doubt dies hard. The major snapped, "Don't get cocky. One lucky call doesn't make you an operator." The sergeant piled on. "She'll choke when it counts. Watch." As if on cue, another desperate call cut through. East Ridge, multiple RPG teams, 50 meters. The F-16s still minutes away. No drones overhead. Only the net stood between survival and slaughter. Nora's hand tightened on the mic. She could feel every eye in the room drilling into her, waiting for her to fold. Instead, she exhaled slow, calm, like she had taught herself years ago. Trident actual, mark your position with IR. I'll walk artillery north, 50 meters at a time. Keep your heads down. There was a pause. Then, copy that, Reyes, we'll hold, artillery thundered. Nora's adjustments came in clipped, exact bursts. Shift 20 north. Fire, shift 20 more. Fire. Each correction shaved the beaten zone closer to the SEALs without crossing it. Each strike bought them seconds, meters, breaths. In the room, the smirks faded. The sergeant who had mocked her crossed his arms, jaw tight. The major tapped a pencil so hard it snapped. Someone whispered, not to her but to the room, "She's not supposed to know how to do this." Another voice answered, "Then how come they're still alive?" Still, the insults found oxygen. "She's just repeating what she's heard. She can't keep that up. She'll crack when the valley really closes." Every word meant to drag her back into the corner where she belonged. But the radio didn't care about opinions. And the SEALs on the ground didn't either. They cared about one thing, whether the voice in their ear could lead them out of the kill box. Reyes leaned into the net again. "Trident, push 2 teams west under my fire. Stay below the rock lip. I'm walking rounds uphill ahead of you." The reply came back, breathless but steady. "Copy." Moving. Her pen scribbled nothing. Her eyes never left the map she carried in her head. To the TOC, she was still a clerk out of her lane. But to 361 Americans pinned in that valley, she had become the only lifeline left. And she wasn't letting go. The valley roared with overlapping fire, but inside the TOC, the only sound that mattered was her voice. Nora Reyes spoke into the handset with calm precision, each syllable clipped clean. "Trident, shift fire, 30 meters north. Break, hold position. Stand by for next correction." Her cadence was textbook, not rushed. Not sloppy. She used the exact radio brevity codes every JTAC drilled for months, but no one had ever taught her. The fire support officer blinked. "She sounds like she's been doing this for years." The sergeant who had mocked her earlier leaned closer, frowning now instead of laughing. Another call came in, frantic. Multiple hostiles massing on the West Ridge, Grid 229659, less than 100 meters. Everyone in the room froze. Less than 100 was off limits. The air officer shook his head. "Jets can't touch that. Too danger close." Reyes didn't hesitate. "Trident actual, copy West Ridge Grid 229659, recommend suppression with 60 mic. Adjusting fire, stand by." She rattled off corrections with the confidence of the seasoned operator. Left 25, fire. Drop 10, fire. The howitzers answered. The explosions walked up the slope exactly where she placed them. SEAL comms came back, calmer now, good effects. Ridge suppressed, corridor opening. The officers in the room stared at her like she had just broken physics. The colonel finally asked, his voice tight. "Specialist, how do you know those ridges by name?" She didn't look up from the map in her head. "Studied them, sir." But she wasn't talking about paper maps. She had walked the lines in her imagination at 3 in the morning, tracing every fold and shadow until she could recite them without looking. The room didn't know that. They only heard a clerk calling ridgelines the way a JTAC would. The silence stretched, heavy, until another desperate call shattered it. "East slope, enemy assault, 70 meters. Voices overlapped again, panic creeping back in. Reyes's tone never changed. Trident, designate with spark. "Confirm, IR marker east slope, 70 meters. A faint confirmation came back, spark lit. "Solid copy, stand by." She shifted artillery one last time, threading explosions between friendly strobes and hostile muzzle flashes. The line went quiet. Then the SEAL commander's voice broke through, steady. "Target neutralized. 0 fratricide, good work, good work." From a commander who had no idea the voice saving them belonged to an admin clerk sitting behind a desk. By now, the room was watching her in disbelief. The smirks were gone, the whispers died. Only the sound of her voice and the scratch of pens on notebooks remained. Officers who had dismissed her were suddenly taking notes on what she was doing. The major muttered, almost to himself, "That's not luck, that's method." Then came the strangest moment of all. Enemy chatter broke across the net. Some of their frequencies bled into the airwaves, a mix of Pashto and garbled static. The linguist assigned to the shift wasn't there. Confusion spread. No one in the TOC understood, except Reyes. She lifted the mic again, and in a calm, accented Pashto, she snapped out a short phrase, sharp, commanding. The enemy chatter cut off instantly. The sergeant gaped at her. "What did you just say?" She didn't answer. She just keyed up again, her eyes steady. Trident, actual, threat comms disrupted. Continue, movement west. The room had no idea how she had done it. They didn't know she had been learning Pashto phrases for months, quietly, from interpreters who appreciated her curiosity. She had practiced late at night, whispering words until they fit into her tongue. Now those words turned into weapons, not bullets, but confusion that stalled the enemy long enough to matter. One by one, the doubts began to choke themselves out. "She's just a clerk," someone whispered half-heartedly, but his tone had no conviction. Another officer shook his head. "Clerks don't do this." The colonel stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. On the net, Reyes's commands grew sharper, more surgical. "Trident, push 3 elements through the gap. Stay tight to the rock, I'll keep fire ahead of you. Trident, confirm you're at the fold. Copy. Hold position. I'm walking rounds uphill, danger close, 50 meters ahead." Her words carried the weight of discipline, not panic. Every command kept 361 Americans alive for another breath, another bound. The SEALs trusted her voice. The TOC began too. Slowly, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The laughter had vanished. The smirks turned into furrowed brows, the dismissals into silence. People leaned forward now, listening, not mocking. The sergeant who had cracked the stapler joke earlier crossed his arms, but his eyes never left her. They weren't ready to admit it yet, but the truth was pressing in. The quiet clerk wasn't just logging traffic anymore. She was holding the battle together, and the longer she spoke, the more impossible it became to pretend otherwise. The battle outside raged like a storm that refused to pass. Bullets clawed rock, mortars chewed dirt, and the sound of men shouting into broken comms bled into the TOC through the radio's static. Reyes held the handset steady, thumb pressed lightly on the key. She was no longer repeating orders. She was shaping the fight. Trident. Actual, confirm your nearest enemy contact. The reply came ragged. East Ridge, multiple RPG teams. Less than 50 meters. We can't. The voice cracked, drowned in gunfire. The air officer shook his head. No shot. Too danger close. A lieutenant muttered. We'll lose them, that's it. We'll lose them. Reyes exhaled slow. Her mind walked the valley again, the folds she had memorized by candlelight. She could see the slope, the way it bent like a crooked finger. She keyed the mic. Trident, danger close fire mission, 50 meters. Confirm IR marker on friendlies. A pause. Then the SEAL commander's voice, tight but trusting. Marker lit. Do it! The fire support officer almost shouted. She can't. 50 meters is suicide. But the rounds were already on their way. The valley erupted. A perfect line of explosions stitched across the ridge, shaving stone but never touching the strobes. The radio went silent. For 3 long seconds, no one breathed. Then the commander came back, firm. Good effect. Ridge clear. Corridor holding. In the TOC, the silence was different now. No laughter. No whispers. Just disbelief settling into awe. The digital system suddenly flickered, screens freezing. The GPS overlays went black. Panic rippled across the staff table. We lost digital feeds. We can't track grids without them. All eyes darted toward the colonel, but Reyes was already moving. She pulled a notebook from her pocket, pages crammed with pencil lines and numbers she had memorized weeks ago. Trident, stand by. I have your coordinates. You are at grid 229574. Confirm. A beat then, confirmed. That's us. She didn't need the system. She carried the map in her head, every contour traced until it lived in muscle memory. The staff stared, mouths half open. She was making calls faster than the machines had. On the ground, another voice broke through, younger, higher-pitched, trembling. This is Trident 2. We can't move. We're cut off. The words tumbled out in panic. They're closing in. We're out of ammo. We can't. The TOC froze. Panic on the net was contagious. One crack could unravel the entire corridor. Reyes pressed the mic, her voice low and even. Trident 2. Breathe. Static. Heavy breathing. She repeated, firmer. Breathe. Say again slowly. I have you. The net steadied. The young officer came back, slower this time. We're pinned. North slope, 2 enemy squads, maybe more. Grid 229582. Solid copy, Reyes replied. Hold position. I'm walking fire uphill ahead of you. Stay low. You're not alone. She began calling corrections with calm precision. Shift 10, north. Fire. Shift 20 more. Fire. Each detonation cracked closer, her voice guiding steel like a surgeon's scalpel. The officer came back, steadier now. Copy. We're moving, thank you. Reyes didn't answer. She just kept the net alive. The TOC had gone utterly still. The same sergeant who had laughed about staplers now leaned forward, elbows on knees, watching her like she was rewriting doctrine with every word. The colonel finally whispered, almost to himself, she's keeping them alive with nothing but her voice. Another urgent call crackled through. Trident actual, enemy vehicle with mounted PKM, North Ridge. Reyes didn't miss a beat. Copy, vehicle North Ridge. Adjust fire grid 229601. Fire for effect. The artillery answered. A blast tore the ridge. The vehicle fell silent. The SEAL commander came back, voice flat but edged with respect. Target destroyed. Good copy. In less than 30 minutes, Nora Reyes had shifted from anonymous clerk to lifeline for 361 Americans. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't improvising. She was doing what she had prepared for in silence all those years, turning chaos into order, static into clarity, fear into direction. And for the first time, the TOC understood. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a fluke. This was mastery. The room no longer mucked. They watched. And they listened to the quiet clerk who had taken the radio and, with nothing more than calm words and perfect calls, kept death at bay in a valley designed to swallow them whole. The AAR room had grown unnervingly still. The same men who had smirked an hour earlier now leaned forward in silence, listening as Specialist Nora Reyes detailed every fire mission, every correction, every clipped command that had pulled 361 Americans through a valley meant to bury them. Her voice didn't rise. She wasn't telling a story to impress. She was explaining, steady and matter-of-fact, how she had kept the net alive. On the screen, the satellite map glowed with ridgelines and grid squares. She tapped a laser pointer against one fold of terrain, her sleeve sliding back just an inch. That was when one of the senior SEAL commanders in the room noticed it. A tattoo, faint but sharp, inked on the inside of her left wrist. A radio tower, stylized, with a string of numbers beneath it. His breath caught. He knew that symbol. He had seen it years earlier, in a different valley, on a night when everything had almost fallen apart. Afghanistan. 2014. An exfil gone sideways. His team surrounded, radios failing, chaos ready to swallow them whole. And then, a voice. Calm, clear, refusing to let panic take root. That voice had walked them out, grid by grid, through a corridor no one thought possible. The filling clerk, they'd called her later, attached for admin but pressed into service when the comm sergeant went down. He had never forgotten her tone. Or the way she signed her notes with those same numbers now etched into her skin. The commander stood slowly, chair scraping against the tile. The entire room turned to watch. He walked to the front, boots heavy against the floor, and stopped directly in front of her. Reyes stiffened, uncertain, eyes flicking from him to the colonel. The SEAL commander didn't speak at first. He just looked at her wrist, then at her face. Finally, his voice carried low, steady. "You kept us alive once before." A murmur rippled through the room. "You were there in Kunar," he said, louder now for all to hear. "You were the one on the net when we thought we'd never get out." Reyes opened her mouth, then closed it. She had never expected to be recognized. Never expected anyone to connect the quiet clerk with that night. The commander didn't wait for her answer. He raised his hand, slow and deliberate, and saluted. The room froze. Every Marine, every SEAL, every soldier in the hall went silent. The same officers who had laughed, the sergeant who had muttered stapler jokes, the captains who had dismissed her as background. All of them sat motionless as the salute hung in the air. The colonel's throat tightened. Slowly, almost reverently, he came to his feet and mirrored the salute. Then, one by one, chairs scraped back, boots planted, and the entire room rose. 100 hands lifted to brows in unison. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the projector and the quiet thump of hearts caught between shame and awe. Nora Reyes's eyes burned, but she did not cry. She returned the salute with the same quiet strength she had shown on the net. The commander's voice broke the silence. 361 men walked out alive because you refused to stay silent. Because you refused to be just a clerk. The words struck harder than artillery. The men who had mocked her earlier now bowed their heads, unable to meet her gaze. The room that had started with laughter was now drenched in silence so deep it felt sacred. It was the goosebump moment no one expected. Not the storm of explosions in the valley. Not the precision calls. Not even the Pashto that had silenced enemy chatter. It was the revelation that the smallest, quietest soldier in the room had already carried this weight once before and carried it again when it mattered most. The AAR wasn't just about tactics anymore. It was about truth. And the truth stood in front of them. Specialist Nora Reyes, the clerk who had become the voice of survival. The room stood frozen in silence, the kind that swallows every sound except the thump of your own heartbeat. Nora Reyes lowered her hand from the salute, but the SEAL commander kept his raised. He wasn't performing. He wasn't posing. He was honoring. And then he said it. The line that would be repeated in chow halls and barracks for years to come. 361 Americans walked out alive because a clerk refused to stay silent. The words rolled across the hall like thunder, shaking men who thought they'd heard it all. The colonel straightened, his own salute still sharp. "You heard him," he said quietly, but his voice carried to every corner. One by one, every Marine, every SEAL, every soldier in the room came to attention. The same men who had smirked, the ones who had laughed, the voices that had muttered, "Stapler" and "paper pusher." They now stood rigid, eyes forward, hands raised in respect. The weight of it was cinematic, almost unreal. 100 uniforms snapping to stillness. 100 faces turned from disbelief to reverence. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Reyes didn't seek it. She hadn't asked for a stage, hadn't written a speech, hadn't prepared to be anything more than a line clerk logging notes. But here she was, at the center of a moment none of them would forget. The sergeant who had joked the loudest earlier was the first to speak. His voice cracked, stripped of all arrogance. "Specialist Reyes, I was wrong." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. His silence afterward said more than his words. The SEAL commander lowered his salute finally, stepping back half a pace, his eyes locked on hers. "You gave us calm when we had none. You gave us order when the valley was chaos. You gave us a chance to live." A pause. Then, softer, "We'll never forget it." His words carried the gravity of men who knew loss too well and knew what it meant when someone pulled them back from its edge. The colonel cleared his throat, trying to wrestle his own voice back under control. "Specialist Reyes, today you taught this room something we should have already known. Rank does not define courage. Job titles do not decide who holds the line, and when the radios fell silent, you refused to." Every officer in the room nodded. Not a stiff, mechanical nod, but the slow bow of men acknowledging truth. Outside, the world kept moving, helicopters cycling, convoys rolling, boots marching across gravel. But inside that hall, time stretched. A clerk stood where a warrior should have, and no one dared to question it anymore. The room that had begun with laughter was now welded into reverent silence. Then, slowly, the respect broke into something deeper. The SEAL commander stepped back, heels together, voice carrying once more. "Gentlemen and Marines," his eyes flicked around the room. "If you respect what she did, show it." Boots snapped. Arms rose again, and the entire room saluted one last time in perfect unison. 100 voices didn't shout. They didn't need to. The silence itself was the tribute. It was the cinematic climax every soldier hopes to witness once in a lifetime. Not medals pinned, not parades, not headlines. Just raw respect, stripped of ceremony, born in the recognition that one quiet clerk had carried the weight of 361 lives and refused to drop it. Nora Reyes didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply returned the salute, steady and sure, the same way she had kept her voice steady in the valley. The respect finally given was more powerful than any decoration, and for the first time she was no longer invisible. When the last salute lowered and the chairs scraped quietly back, Nora Reyes stood exactly as she had before, hands folded over her notes, posture calm, eyes forward. She didn't bask in it. She didn't lean into the attention or the awe. When the colonel offered her the floor to speak, she cleared her throat once and said only, "I just did what had to be done." Her voice didn't waver. She didn't claim to be a warrior, didn't wrap herself in titles. She didn't pretend she was the hero of the valley. She simply stated the truth as she saw it, that silence would have killed them, and she refused to let silence win. In the days that followed, her name moved quietly through the ranks. Not in headlines, not in speeches, but in whispers of respect. Reyes held the net. She didn't break. She kept 361 alive with nothing but her voice. The sergeant who had mocked her first made a point to stop by her office. He didn't bring paperwork. He didn't bring excuses. He just said, "You were more soldier than any of us that day." Then he left, as if words were too small to carry the weight of his regret. She went back to her desk. Back to the stacks of forms, the endless flow of leave packets and award drafts. But now, when soldiers passed by, they didn't see background noise. They saw the quiet strength that had once cut through static and kept them breathing. Nora Reyes never wore a tab. She never carried a ranger scroll. Her chest never bore rows of ribbons. But when men spoke of courage, her name lived beside theirs, because courage does not always wear rank. Sometimes it wears pressed sleeves and ink stains from a ballpoint pen. Sometimes it listens more than it speaks. Sometimes it waits until the valley turns black, until chaos roars through the net, until lives are seconds from being lost. And then it picks up the handset and says, "Steady, I have you." That is the moral her story carved into every man who heard it. True courage doesn't announce itself. It doesn't chase applause. It doesn't need permission. It lives in the quietest person in the room, the one everyone underestimates, the one dismissed as unimportant, until the moment comes when strength is measured not by size or title, but by the ability to stay calm when everyone else is breaking. Nora Reyes reminded them all that day that the Army's greatest power isn't its machines or its weapons or even its ranks. It's the people who refuse to quit when silence threatens to take everything. And so, while the official record might list her as an administrative clerk, while the citations might speak only of exemplary service, the men who lived because of her knew better. They knew she was the reason 361 Americans came home, not because she fought with a rifle, not because she piloted a jet, but because she used the oldest weapon of all, calm courage. That day, her voice was stronger than steel, and that's the part no one will ever forget. When we think of heroes, we often picture the ones charging forward, weapons raised, or pilots diving through fire. But sometimes the truest courage is quieter. A steady voice on a broken net, a clerk who refused to let silence decide the fate of her brothers in arms. Specialist Nora Reyes proved that strength isn't always worn on the sleeve. Sometimes it's carried in the heart, revealed only when the world is at its darkest. 361 Americans walked out alive because she chose to speak when others hesitated. That's a legacy no one can erase. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These stories keep the courage alive for generations to come.